If you've ever given everything to a job, loyalty, time, weekends, birthdays only, to be dismissed like you were never there, this story might feel familiar. Please subscribe for more stories of quiet resilience, and leave a comment. Have you ever been replaced without a thank you? My name is John Whitaker, and for 18 years, I flew planes for the same company, not just any planes, commercial jets carrying hundreds of people across skies. I knew better than most know their own neighborhoods. I flew through monsoons, over the Pacific, ice storms across the Rockies, and engine alarms at 38,000 feet. I once landed a 737 with half the instruments gone because I trusted my gut, and my crew trusted me. I'd seen babies born mid-flight. I'd seen passengers die quietly. 5 rows behind the galley, I'd trained junior pilots, covered Christmas shifts, slept in hotel rooms so often they started feeling more familiar than my own bed back home. And I'd never missed a single departure, not once. So when the letter came folded in a thin manila envelope with the company logo at the top and nothing personal in the tone, it didn't feel like a layoff. It felt like an erasure. I remembered the moment it happened. The new boss, some suit named Anderson, fresh from a logistics company, who thought flying a plane was no different than managing a trucking route, called me into his glass office, didn't even look up at first, just kept scrolling something on a tablet before finally saying, "Captain Whitaker, we've reviewed flight hour allocations for the upcoming restructure." Restructure, the word that always pretends to be polite. "You'll be stepping down as of next month. We're moving toward younger, cost-effective rotations. It's nothing personal." I almost laughed. Nothing personal. I'd spent more time in their cockpits than with my own son growing up. I'd missed his first birthday because of a grounded flight in Denver, missed his high school graduation when weather delays stacked up back to back. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I just stood there, nodded once, and said, "Understood." He offered his hand. I looked at it for half a second before walking out. I didn't shake it, because I knew that hand hadn't lifted a coffee pot at 3 a.m. with frost on the inside of the cockpit windows. It had never felt turbulence and silence at the same time. It hadn't earned the weight it tried to carry. The next few days were quiet, too quiet. I didn't tell my crew right away. Not the junior pilots who looked to me as the steady hand in crosswinds. Not Lisa, my longtime co-pilot, who knew what I needed before I even asked. Not Alan in maintenance, who used to sneak an extra pack of coffee into my bag before long hauls. I've needed a minute, not to grieve, but to center, to figure out who I was without a uniform and flight schedule. The day I packed my locker, the airport lights felt too bright. The hum of the terminal too distant, like I was suddenly on the outside of something I'd helped build from the inside. I took one last look at gate C-17. That was my gate, always had been, until it wasn't. What they didn't know, what Anderson couldn't possibly understand, that flying planes wasn't just what I did, it was who I became. But it wasn't all I was, and if they thought I'd spent nearly 2 decades flying machines but not reading people, they were wrong, because I'd been listening to the complaints behind closed doors, to the way they treated cabin crew like disposable name tags, to the way every new policy removed just a little more dignity from the people who made their brand work. And I wasn't the only one. I didn't post anything on social media, didn't write a rage-fueled blog post. I just walked away, but quietly. Beneath that walk something began to move, a shift, not in anger, in alignment, because while they thought I was exiting, I was only beginning my final ascent. Asterisk, I thought leaving would be quiet. Turns out silence has a way of carrying. The morning after I cleared my locker, I stopped by Hangar 3 just to say goodbye to Alan. He was already in his coveralls, wiping oil off his hands, earbuds tucked under his collar. He saw me, stopped mid-wipe, and frowned. "You're early," he said. "You flying today?" I shook my head. "Nah," I said. "Just came to say thanks for the coffee, for always having my back." He stared at me, the silence growing heavy. "They did it, didn't they?" I didn't need to answer. He set down the rag. "Damn." We didn't say much more, just a quiet nod between men who'd shared more sky together than most blood relatives do. But the next day, Lisa called. "You left without saying goodbye." I didn't want to make it messy, I told her. "Well, too late for that." Then she hung up. I didn't know what she meant until the following week, when my phone lit up with a message from one of the junior flight attendants, Captain Whitaker. Half the crew just submitted their notice. "What's going on?" "Half the crew?" I stared at the screen, heart still. And then came another message, and another. "If you're building something, we want in. If you're walking, tell us where. They can have their new policies. We want our dignity back." I hadn't planned for any of it, but somehow, without trying, I'd become a symbol, not of rebellion, of remembrance, that some things, like trust, like leadership, like being seen still, mattered in a world chasing efficiency over everything else. The walkouts began in clusters. A veteran pilot in Atlanta declined his next rotation. A senior flight attendant with 2 decades under her belt walked off leaving a resignation letter folded in the pocket of her service vest. By week 3, nearly 37 members of my former crew had turned in their resignations. Some didn't even leave notes. They just left. Anderson didn't respond publicly, of course. The company sent out a cold memo about staffing adjustments and pilot recalibrations, as if real people could be plugged in and out like battery cells. But behind closed doors, I knew the calls were happening. Recruiters scrambling, delays stacking, clients asking uncomfortable questions, and all the while, I said nothing, because this wasn't about revenge. It was about something far rarer: integrity, moving without announcement. 2 months passed. I kept a low profile, consulted here and there, met with a few old-timers who still wore their wings with pride, but quietly wondered if there was another way, not to fly planes, but to fly with purpose again. And then came the opportunity. Not an airline, not a competitor, a startup, a private aviation group started by 3 ex-commercial pilots who wanted to change the model: less burnout, more respect, better pay, and ownership shares for crew. They offered me a seat at the table. Not to fly, to lead. I asked for one condition. "I want my crew," I said, "the ones who walked, the ones who stood when it cost them something." They said yes, and just like that, what started as a dismissal became a mission, not to replace what was lost, to rebuild what should have been there all along. 3 weeks later, our team had uniforms, not the stiff corporate ones, but jackets with our own emblem, sky blue, stitched into the lining, a symbol only we understood, a pair of wings breaking out of a glass box, freedom with structure, purpose with pride. And on our first official charter flight, I stood at the gate, watching Lisa prep the team. Alan was on comms, laughing like I hadn't heard in years. The junior crew members were sharper than ever, nervous but ready. Before boarding, Lisa walked up to me. "You good, Captain?" I shook my head. "No." She raised an eyebrow. "I'm better." Inside the cabin, I sat down, not in the cockpit this time, but in seat 2A, watching as the doors closed and the engines hummed to life. The sky opened like it always does, but this time, it didn't feel like I was leaving anything behind. It felt like I was finally coming home. It came on a Wednesday, mid-morning, blue skies outside, coffee still warm in my hand. The new operations team reviewing a client onboarding process in the conference room behind me. I'd just stepped out for air when my phone lit up with a number I hadn't saved, but one I recognized. I stared at it for a moment. "Funny how quickly you remember voices that never really listened," I answered. "John Whitaker, speaking." There was a pause on the other end, just long enough for doubt to sneak in. Then, "John, it's Anderson." His voice wasn't sharp this time, not clipped or confident. It was smaller. "I didn't say anything," he continued. "I was hoping we could talk about." Another pause. "You've no doubt heard about the staffing shortages." I let that sit. "I've heard a few things," I said, keeping my tone steady. He cleared his throat. "Look, I'll be direct. We underestimated the impact your departure would have." Departure, I repeated. "That's an interesting word for being dismissed after 18 years without thanks," he sighed. "It was a strategic call, John. You know how these things go per management, metrics, age brackets, cost-benefit models." "You mean the spreadsheets that don't show loyalty, crew cohesion, or what happens to morale when you remove the backbone of a system and act surprised when it collapses?" He didn't respond, just breathed into the phone. "We're trying to rebuild," he said finally, "and I think it would send a powerful message if you came back, even just in an advisory role. The crew trusts you, always did." I stared out. Over the balcony rail, the morning sun climbing higher. Across the street, someone was walking a golden retriever. It looked up like it could hear our conversation. "I'm not coming back, Anderson." "I understand," he said, too quickly. "But we're offering a generous compensation package, equity, bonuses, flexibility in hours. This isn't about money." I cut in, calm but direct. "Then what is it about?" he asked, frustration curling into his voice. "It's about the flight attendant you cut after 15 years without even a goodbye. The mechanic whose warnings were ignored until we lost an aircraft to maintenance delays. It's about a culture you tried to rewire with numbers, not people." I took a breath. "And more than that, it's about what I've built now, what we've built. A team that doesn't have to be afraid of the next memo. A place where pilots don't feel like line items, where flight crews are treated like the professionals they are, not expenses to minimize." He was quiet for a long time. Then finally, "I guess I misjudged the situation." "No," I said, "you misjudged the people." After the call, I stood in silence, not triumphant, just present. That's what clarity feels like. Not a punchline, not revenge, just knowing exactly who you are when someone else forgets to look inside. Lisa knocked on the glass and waved me back in. The team was finishing their review. Maps spread across the table, new routes being discussed with the kind of energy I hadn't felt in years. I walked back in and sat down, the door clicking closed behind me. No one asked about the call, and I didn't bring it up, because we were too busy building something worth protecting that weekend. I flew again, not because I had to, because I wanted to. We had a small charter Seattle to Juneau, 10 passengers, one little girl who waved at me like I was a superhero when I walked into the cabin before takeoff. I stood in the cockpit again. My hands rested gently on the yoke, fingers tracing over the controls like muscle memory never left. Lisa leaned over my shoulder from the first officer's seat. "Feels familiar, huh?" "Feels right," I said, and we took off, smooth, confident, no turbulence, at cruising altitude. I turned autopilot on and leaned back. Outside, the sky opened wide like it always had, but this time, I didn't feel like I was flying for someone else's vision. This was mine, every mile of it, every crew member behind me, every ounce of dignity they thought they could strip when they handed me that envelope. When we landed, the little girl stopped beside me on her way off the plane. "You're the nicest pilot I've ever had," she said. "You didn't sound like a robot." I smiled. "That's because I'm not." She nodded, like that made all the sense in the world, and followed her parents down the jet bridge that night. Back at the lodge, I looked at my reflection in the window. No wings pinned to my shirt, no corporate patch on my arm, just me, John Whitaker, pilot, leader, builder of something they couldn't see coming. Not because I wanted credit, because I finally flew free. The fallout came faster than anyone expected. Within 3 months of my departure, and the quiet walkout that followed delay at my old airline had tripled. Cancellations were piling up. Customer complaints hit new highs. Flight crews, the ones who'd stayed behind, were overworked, undersupported, and calling out sick more often than not. They tried hiring replacements. New pilots, younger, cheaper. A few transfers from regional partners. But you can't replace 18 years of trust and shared sky with a resume and a lanyard. You can't download culture into a cockpit. And Anderson, for all his spreadsheets and projections, was finally learning the one truth every good captain knows. It's not the wings that make a flight safe. It's the people who wear them. Lisa told me one night over dinner that 3 more crew members had reached out to her, 2 flight attendants, 1 ground supervisor, all looking for something else. Not just a job, a place to belong again. So, we made room. We didn't expand to compete, we expanded to include, to give them what the industry had forgotten how to offer: respect. We added more aircraft, rented space at a regional airport just outside of Phoenix, built our own training program. Not because we wanted to be big, because we wanted to be different. The funny thing about being fired is that, for a while, you think your worth was what they said it was. You walk out with your head down, wondering if maybe you were replaceable. But then the calls come, then the people show up. Then the world reminds you that maybe the only thing you were ever missing was the space to lead without apology. Anderson called again. I didn't answer this time. It wasn't out of pride. It was because I was in the middle of reviewing new benefits policies for our expanding team. A junior flight engineer had suggested an idea: rotating family leave so staff could attend school events or take care of loved ones. No approval process, no guilt, just trust. And I realized something as I read it over, red pen in hand. I hadn't just started a new company. I had redefined what flying could feel like for the people who make it happen. The letter came from the board. A few days later, my old company's board of directors, formal stationery, dry language. They regretted the loss of institutional knowledge. They acknowledged an unfortunate culture shift. They hoped to explore collaborative solutions in the future. I placed the letter on my desk, poured myself a coffee, and tossed it, unopened, into the drawer where I kept every set of wings I'd ever worn. From my first solo flight to my final commercial one, they could send letters, but they couldn't rewrite the past, and they'd already sold off what mattered most. Trust. The next week, we held our first all-staff gathering. Nothing fancy. A rented lodge near the mountains, campfires, quiet conversations under starlight. Crew members brought spouses, kids, dogs. No uniforms, no titles, just people. At one point, I stood by the fire, paper plate in one hand, watching the laughter ripple through the courtyard. A junior pilot walked up, Rofik, 24, bright eyes. "Good instincts, Captain John," he said. "Why don't you ever stand up and give big speeches like other CEOs?" I grinned, because no one ever listened to me until I stopped trying to be heard. He nodded slowly, then smiled like he understood more than I expected, and I realized, in that moment, we weren't building an airline. We were building a generation, a new kind of crew, one that didn't just fly between cities, one that flew with purpose. That night, back in my cabin, I found an old photo in my bag, me, years ago, standing in front of my first plane, young, proud, uniform, too big for my shoulders. I barely recognized that man. He still thought loyalty would protect him, that competence alone earned permanence. He didn't know yet that some people only value you until they can't, and that others, they follow you, not because you shout, but because you stood still when everyone else was spinning. I went to sleep with the windows open, the wind whispering through the screens. The next morning, I woke to the sound of jets overhead, taking off for new destinations, new clients, new chapters, and for the first time in a long, long time, I didn't feel like a former pilot. I felt like someone who had finally truly taken off. 6 months after the last phone call from Anderson, I stood at the edge of runway 2L at our newly leased hangar in Colorado Springs, watching the sunrise melt across the wingtips of our newest jet. The paint was still fresh. The emblem, a pair of wings breaking a chain, gleamed just beneath the cockpit windows. Lisa had designed it herself. Our crew was getting ready for the first cross-continental flight under our new certification. It wasn't a charter or a private corporate gig this time. It was ours. A full flight, a scheduled route, and our name on the side of the plane. From the ground up, we had built it. No investors breathing down our necks. No boardrooms stacked with people who had never set foot in a cabin. Just pilots, crew, ground staff, engineers owning what we'd once been told was too big to dream. I stood there a while, coffee in hand, until Lisa walked up beside me. "You sure you don't want to be in the cockpit today?" I smiled. "I already am," I said. She didn't ask what I meant. She knew, because control isn't always a yoke in your hands. Sometimes it's the freedom to walk the runway without being told you don't belong on it. Later that afternoon, we held a small press conference. Nothing flashy, just a rented podium and a few invited guests from local aviation circles. Midway through, Someone from a national aviation magazine asked, "John, what do you think finally caused so many of your former crew to walk out when you left? It couldn't have been just about you, right?" I paused, looked around at my team scattered behind me, not in uniforms, but in their presence. Present in a way I hadn't seen in years. "It wasn't about me," I said. "It was about memory." The reporter blinked. "Memory? Yeah. When a company forgets the names of the people who built it, they shouldn't be surprised when those people remember their own worth." Silence, then applause. Not raucous, just real. 3 weeks later, I heard Anderson had stepped down. The official story said health reasons. The real story, he lost the crew, the confidence, and the only thing you can't spreadsheet into. Existence-trust. I didn't celebrate, didn't gloat. I just walked into my office, turned off the light, and let the quiet settle like a landing after a long haul flight. We'd done it. We didn't just walk out. We lifted off. There's a photo on my desk now, not of my first flight, not of the old company, just a simple picture taken from behind me, walking the tarmac with 3 junior pilots, all laughing at something I can't remember. I keep it there to remind myself what leadership really looks like. It doesn't always come with medals or corner offices. Sometimes it looks like showing up every day when no one thanks you. Sometimes it looks like leaving quietly when others try to silence you. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it looks like turning back one last time, seeing the people behind you still walking, still trusting you on, realizing they never followed because you had the title. They followed because you never stopped standing for them. So if you're watching this and you've ever been cut loose, written off, or told you're too old, too slow, too quiet to matter, I'm here to say, you matter, not because a company says so, not because your title proves it, but because the sky is still open and you get to decide how you take it back. One step, one runway, one new chapter at a time. We did, and trust me, it's a hell of a view from up here.